Hello, my name is Nikki Otten, and I am the Associate Curator of Prints and Drawings at the Milwaukee Art Museum. Thanks for joining us for the second installment of Collection Reflection, which is a series of video conversations. And in these conversations, we are exploring thematic links that cut across the subdivisions that traditionally exist in the curatorial department in order to create connections and try to unify the collection at a time that we are physically separated both from it and from each other. In our first series of conversations, we're focusing on the notion of still life and how it has been represented by different artists across time and in different media. And in our last installment of Collection Reflection, you heard from my colleague Tanya Paul about an 18th century still life by the Dutch artist Jan van Os, and I'm sharing the painting with you on the screen now. The work that I've chosen to talk to you about today was selected in response to Tanya's presentation. And I'll be telling you about a pastel by Odilon Redon. It's called Vase of Flowers, and it was created between 1900 and 1916. Redon was a French artist, and he was working towards the end of the 19th century and into the early 20th century. And he's actually best known for his works in black and white. When he first came to critical attention in the 1880s, he was working primarily in charcoal drawing and also in lithography. And here I'm showing you two of Redon's lithographs that we have in the Milwaukee Art Museum collection. And in looking at these works, you can both see some of Redon's more imaginative subjects that he took up during this decade, and you can also see how skilled he became at working in only black and white. He first took up color in the 1890s, and he worked both in oil paint and in pastel. And he finally took up the subject of still life around 1900. The example that I'm showing you today has a group of fairly tightly packed flowers arranged in a decorative painted vase. In the center of this group, we see a lovely white carnation that has some pink highlighting toward the center. And there's also some pink around some of the edges on the right side of the carnation. You can also see some soft blue modeling on the edges of the petals on the left side of the flower. To the lower left, we see a burgundy flower that's perhaps a lily. To the upper left, we see perhaps a poppy. There are a couple of pansies over to the right, a white daisy toward the top, and then blue lilacs that encircle the entire arrangement. These flowers have enough detail that we can make a guess as to what type of flower they are, but they're not rendered with quite enough precision to be completely sure of our identifications. And that's quite different from the still life that Tanya showed you in our last installment of the series, because in his floral still life, Jan van Os is rendering every petal of the flower arrangement with quite a lot of illusionistic detail. Redon's choice not to do that himself was very deliberate. And Redon was very familiar with nature. He grew up on his family's vineyard outside of Bordeaux in France, and he had a lot of respect for nature and often went out into the woods around his home in order to sketch from life. Despite this, his primary goal was not to create a completely faithful replica of a floral arrangement, but rather, as a symbolist artist, Redon was interested in showing the power of his imagination and in creating specific moods and spiritual responses in the viewers who saw his work. In fact, if we look at his work very closely, we can see that there are some elements of the still life that are quite unreal. I'm sure you've noticed in previous slides that there are these kind of sprays of very delicate blooms that ring the outside of the floral arrangement in Redon's pastel. And I've enlarged a couple of details from those sprigs. And you can see that they're very barely rendered on the surface of the paper. On the left side, you see there are a few pink slashes of pastel, and those are meant to represent the stems of the sprigs of flowers. But you'll see that there are fairly significant gaps between the individual segments of the sprigs, and there are also gaps between the stems and the blooms themselves. And this is especially evident on the right side of the image, where the little flowers toward the bottom of the selection that's enlarged seem to be floating or falling off of the stems. And this overall creates a real sense of fragility to the image. And as I mentioned earlier, Redon didn't take up this subject until 1900, and at that point he was 60 years old. So he may have been thinking about his older age or even his own mortality at this point. And the fragility of this image is really underscored by Redon's decision to work in pastel. Pastel is a powdered pigment that's held together with a binding agent, and it's quite a fragile medium. It's subject to fading if it's exposed to light, and it can also fairly easily be shaken from the paper support if you move it around too much. So his use of this medium, which is itself very delicate, helps to underscore the idea of the fragility of these flowers and possibly the fragility and delicacy of life itself. So in this work, we have Redon working from nature, but in a way that really emphasizes his own subjectivity and his own ability to create specific responses in his viewers. And he's reflecting on the ephemeral quality of nature and life itself, and underscoring that with his use of a very delicate medium. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this segment, and we're looking forward to welcoming you back to the museum once we're able to reopen. Thank you.